All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Usapang Football from Phil Oil Flying V Sports. I'm your host, Rick Olivares. With us tonight is a very special guest, a man who is from a country that is like what, 7,000 miles away, but he found his glory on the pitch over here in Southeast Asia, where he's made a name winning championships here and there. And his name will forever be in Azkals history for having led the Philippines to its first ever semifinals berth of the Suzuki Cup. This man is a brilliant coach. He's an underrated coach, but if you ask me, he has one of the best minds in the game. Without further ado, Coach Simon McMenemy. Good evening, Coach.
Evening, Rick. That's a hell of an introduction.
Well, you deserve it, right?
Well,
you got your championships.
I guess that's for others to decide, but I'll take it as you're giving it.
Anyway, Coach, how has it been for you and the family during this pandemic?
Listen, I can't complain. You know, we're lucky enough to have a nice house, and my son swims now, so it's difficult trying to fish him out the pool every day. I'm very blessed to be in the situation I am, and given the fact that others are struggling at this time, you know, I don't have any complaints. We're healthy, we're safe, we're bored, but then who isn't? I count myself very, very lucky.
Okay, for the people who are watching this live webcast and those who are in the panel, the attendees here, Dr. Carlo Jose San Juan. We have Kevin Estrada, who's also a member of the media. We have others watching, like our friends, Adelph Tupas, they're all watching, Coach. This is for everyone's information, Coach Simon just won a championship in Indonesia, and he's also on Fox doing football. For those who don't know about that, Coach, you want to talk about what you're doing?
Yeah, I've been complaining to Fox Sports pretty much ever since I was back in the Philippines that all the coverage that they give, especially the AFC Cup and the Azkals games, are always very, very inaccurate. They put Jimmy Younghusband in goal and Stefan Schrock playing fullback, and they seem to talk a good game, but really don't do a hell of a lot of research, and maybe just don't even know. So I've been pestering them for a long time, just saying, listen, let's start getting this right. You know, there's people in the Philippines who care about football, who watch these games. The Azkals are one of the top sides in Southeast Asia, so at least show them a little bit of respect now. Yeah. And finally, they took me up on it, and I get to go on there and talk about all things, not just Philippines, but Indonesia and my time in Vietnam as well. So I'm kind of the only guy there that has actually got experience of working in those countries. So for whatever reason, they seem to like me.
Well, you deserve it, Coach. If you ask me, you've always done a good job, a masterful job everywhere you've gone. Okay, the reason why we're doing this webcast is that this is the 10th year anniversary of the 2010 Suzuki Cup, of which you played a prominent role. So we're doing a countdown. We're not even sure what football competition will take place over the next few months. So we're not going to wait for that. We're going to get ahead and do this countdown. We've already had Chiefy on the program. And, you know, over the next tomorrow, actually, we're having Ali Borromeo. The day after that, we're going to have James, it's either James Younghusband, and on the weekend, we have Rob Gear. So, you know, this is really exciting, Coach. And it's only right that we have you as one of our first participants in this webcast. So, Coach, you know, you arrived in August of 2010, taking over from Des Bulpin, and you had to whip this team in shape in time for the Suzuki Cup. Having watched you inside the locker room, I always thought that you brought in a mania for defense, because I was watching how you draw up your everything, and you always paid attention to defense. Could you say that it was one of the things that you brought into the Azkals? Because previous to that, they were always getting blown out. But when you came in, our biggest loss was 1-0?
Yeah, so long as you don't count the friendly we played before we went to... yeah, there was a few goals that day.
But Coach, the team wasn't even complete that day, right?
No, that was a very different team. Very different. The thing that I had to do, getting off the plane and using the knowledge I had at the time, and bear in mind that this was, I was very inexperienced at this level, at senior level. I just adapted as much common sense as I could to the job. And I for the first 2 weeks of training, I just looked at what we were good at. What could we do that might just hold some sort of strength against better teams? And that's with the greatest respect to the players I had. It was about evaluating very quickly what we had within the ranks. What could we use as a weapon? Was it speed? Was it height? Was it amazing passing? But given guys like Ali Borromeo and Jimmy Younghusband and some of the other players that we had access to, we knew that we had size and strength, and we had the ability to be physical. We could possibly use that as a weapon. So we started off. I didn't want to mix things too much. I knew that Des had already started on working some. He was trying to press from the front before I got there. In some of his training sessions, I was looking over and speaking to people that they wanted to play high up the pitch and try and press guys. But I just thought that might work against teams that were at our level. But if we go up against teams that are a lot better than us, who are good on the ball and technical, they would just rip us apart. And pressing is something that I've found over the last 10 years that, you're only as good as the weakest link. So if one guy doesn't move, then the whole thing breaks down. So to try and organize that in a very short space of time with players that were flying in for games and flying out quite quickly afterwards, and not a lot of time on the training pitch, we needed a system that we could play fairly simply, that guys knew, that I didn't really have to coach that much, that they would come in and have half an idea already. I wouldn't do too much training on the pitch. So, playing a 4-4-2 and playing it fairly defensively would make use of a lot of the size and strength that we had. And then when you had a guy like Phil Younghusband up front, who was always good for a goal, no matter who he was playing against, whether it was Japan or Timor-Leste, we always thought that we could score goals. So if we could stop goals going in, we'd always have a chance to win the game. So we just set about trying to work that strength and use that as a weapon. And even in the early games, in the qualification, we pressed. We went up against Timor-Leste and really pressed them across the top of their box and played really high. But coming out of that and only qualifying on goal difference, I just thought, we can't do this. We're going to get ripped apart by good teams. So we had to come up with something a little bit different. And again, we reverted back to the evaluation we made early on, that we have a lot of size and strength. And when you've got someone like Neil in goal, you can use that to your advantage. Before they win the game, they have to beat you. And if they can't beat you, then they can't win. So we just set about making that our biggest weapon, the thing that teams would have to try and beat. And lo and behold, the boys reacted to it, decided they weren't going to get beat. And, we held it all the way up until the semi-finals.
Exactly. Coach, you said that when you arrived, you were fairly inexperienced. When we got to Vietnam, if you recall the press conference, there was a question asked of Radi Avramovich, and he was asked, what do you think of the Philippines' chances? And then he said, well, talk to me when you win a game. Did you feel disrespected then? And
yeah, 100%. 100%. I got off the plane. We got to Vietnam. It was all just bright lights, and I'm a rabbit in the headlights, just kind of looking around and seeing the cameras and the hype. And I've never been exposed to that before at any level. But then the reality kicks in when you're sitting there with the three other coaches, and all they're talking about is how important it's going to be to score as many goals as possible against the Philippines. And you're in the room, you're sat next to them, and it's going from Radi, who's that side of the panel, to Callisto, who's this side.
And then Coach Park.
Me and the Myanmar guys are kind of just sitting there. We're not getting any questions because no one really cares about us. It's all about Singapore, and it's going back and forwards with Singapore and Vietnam. So the fact that they both spoke not disrespectfully. I've done a lot of press conferences since those days, and it's quite difficult to answer those questions without sounding, condescending to an opponent, especially what was deemed a weaker opponent. It's quite difficult to be realistic in those situations. But yeah, I walked out of that thinking, no, I don't like that. I really don't like that. And I walked out pissed. I really did. And, I did a chat with Chris Greatwich about a month ago on his Across the Line podcast. And I said the same thing. And he remembered. I walked out and I was pissed at the way they were talking about us. That was just so disrespectful. All right, we were the minnows. We weren't supposed to win anything, but without a doubt, that fired me up, which then gave me the motivation to pass that on to the players and send them out on the pitch in the manner that they did. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to share a picture. I'm going to ask you to explain this. This is what you drew up on the board prior to the match against Singapore. Remember, I took a lot of pictures during that
I do,
time.
yeah.
If you need them, just let me know. I'm going to send everything to you.
No problem.
Here we go, Coach. Can you,
I have this picture as well. I saved this picture.
right, right. Can you take us through your game plan, Coach? This is against Singapore.
Yeah, sure. It was a game that no one was expecting us to take anything out of. You know, this was a team that had already won the competition 2 or 3 times with a very experienced coach, with an experienced team. And it's really probably, you know, those 3 things on the side there you see: be confident, be disciplined, and be positive. You know, it's just reminding the players that we could go into this and, you know, there's no reason why we can't get something out of it, but we have to believe we can. So we've got to be confident in what we're doing. You know, we've now know that we have a Premier League goalkeeper in goal at that time. That was the ability that we had as our last line of defense. We had a Premier League. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And I've not seen anyone as good as Neil Etheridge in Southeast Asia. And I've been here 10 years now.
Right.
So to have someone like that in goal, and then have the experience of Rob and you know, the size and the physicality of that back line. Ray, incredibly experienced. Anton puts himself about and is a very physical player. So there's a huge amount of physicality within those back 4.
Mm-hmm.
And that teams would have to work very, very hard to try and break those 4 down.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said to Rob was, listen, I don't really want to coach you too much. You've got a hell of a lot of experience. Work on keeping these guys disciplined. You know, Rob, take responsibility for that back line, get them organized, kneel from behind, keep everybody tight, keep everyone compact, and be difficult to beat. And then we worked quite a lot with that midfield 4, with James on one side and Chiefy on the other. And Jason and Chris just bite everything that comes near you. Anything that comes near you, put a tackle in. Don't let them get onto Rob's toes before, you know, before you start tackling. Make sure the distance between Rob and Ali and Jason and Chris is quite compact and quite small, so they can't play balls in between. So, you know, I don't want to say park the bus, but build a wall and let them try and break it down. And I bet you they won't, because you're far too physical. And then when you've got a passer of the ball like Jimmy and a dribbler like Chiefy on that side, who's very, very good one-on-one and very difficult to deal with.
Right.
You know, you want those to be positive and to get forward and have the confidence to go forward. But at the same time, they've both got great work ethics. So they're both tracking in and making sure that Jason and Chris aren't exposed too much. And again, similar to the way I spoke to Rob, I asked Chris to just, you know, use his experience, talk to that midfield 4, keep them organized. So I kind of had Neil at the back shouting. I had Rob as the captain of the defense, Chris as the captain as the midfield. And then Phil, just talk with Ian. Tell him what you want him to do. Ian's going to be the battering ram. You're going to be the little bit of finesse that just works in the little holes around him and tries to get breakaways. So really, it was just about, like it says there, trying to be confident, trying to stick to the game plan. You know, let's stick together and not get broken down. Be disciplined in what we're asking you to do. Think about what your responsibilities are in those positions. Try not to give away too much space. And be positive when we have the ball. Let's try and go forward. Let's try and score goals. There wasn't really much more I wanted to complicate the issue, because there was a few guys there who had only recently joined the ranks. You know, they'd only been in the team a week or so. Yeah. So I didn't want to make it too complicated. But, you know, I wanted it a fairly simple, simplistic system that they could just drop into, understand what was going on, and be able to communicate. If they didn't understand the players around them or the system around them, they wouldn't be as confident in talking. And, you know, in terms of building a system, it worked very, very well and made it really very, very difficult for teams to break us down, no matter how much they tried.
Exactly. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that about, so be it if we're parking the bus, but make sure we hit them on the counter. I recall in the post-match press conference, Coach Ratty was kind of upset. He said, how can we score goals when they've got everyone behind the line? And I thought it wasn't true. Maybe there were instances, but of course not, because we sure gave them a run for that money during that match. But the question now is, Coach, if you notice in the way you drew up your team, you put Ian right up on top over Phil. But against Vietnam, they were playing alongside each other, lined up against each other. Any particular decision to put Ian up front, Coach?
Oh, Ian was a lot less experienced than Phil. You know, there's not many as experienced as Phil. So that was always going to be a straightforward decision. But Ian will run and chase and fight, and he'll put his head in things. And really, when you want the ball to drop, you want the ball to drop to Phil. As it's been proved, he can play in midfield, he can play defensive midfield, he can pick passes. You know, he wasn't just an out-and-out striker. He was moved around with the Azkals quite often, as we've seen recently. So when balls went into Ian and he had to try and hold them up, even if he didn't win them, then the ball would drop to Phil within that area, and he's the guy you want creating things. He's the guy on the ball who can either hold it up and play into Jason and then get forward, or he can play out wide to Chiefy and then make it into the box himself. So it was always the plan that kind of Ian, bless him, was the kind of battering ram who would go up against the centre-backs. And then Phil would be the one who could drop into the midfield and make 5, or he could make use of the space. He would be the one that was difficult to mark because he was the guy we wanted on the ball. You know, just simply put, we're talking about a basic system. We want our best players on the ball as often as we can. Mm-hmm. So with the greatest of respect to Ian, you know, Ian put in a monumental job and effort doing what he did, kind of taking a lot of the pressure off Phil, but it just freed Phil up enough just to get on the ball a bit more and allow us that little bit of positivity going forward.
Right. Okay. I'm going to show everyone another picture over here. So before we show that picture, I recall during that match against Singapore, even when we were a goal down, you were very, very positive. And you knew that the game wasn't over. Previously, matches against like that was over. How come you never wavered in that belief, Coach? Because I thought the guys picked up on that one, on your positivity during that match.
Well, we had a habit. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but the goal that actually put us through that a lot of people think is one of probably the most underrated goals of the Azkals, the whole of the Azkals, would be Jimmy's goal against Lao, you know, in the qualifiers. That was such an incredibly important goal that without that, we wouldn't have been in this situation. We probably wouldn't be sitting here talking.
Right.
And that was a huge hump from the back from Neil, and Jimmy was just taller than everyone and backheaded it past the goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. So I knew that we had that spirit. I knew that, you know, in the 94th minute, if a team was going to score, it was going to be us because we'd done it before. So there was that little bit of belief that we'd scored late a couple of times. I think we'd had, in the run into that competition, we'd had 2 goals in the 94th minute. So we knew we could score late. So it was just making sure that, all right, if we're going to get beat 1-0, we are going to go as hard as we can until the whistle blows. And if anyone's going to have more chances in the last 2 or 3 minutes, it's going to be us because of that will. So when it's 1-0, you've always got a chance. Anything can happen. We've seen it. How many times have you seen it? You know, whenever it's a 1 goal, teams will pull it back out the fire with a nothing, what looks like a nothing chance or a penalty decision or something from nothing. But I think that one came out of sheer will. We were going to get something out of that game. We were going to work. And I think that, you know, it's my job on the sideline to keep that team pushing. Did I believe we were going to do it? Did I genuinely think so? I can't honestly put my hand on heart and knew there was a goal coming. But I knew that by being positive, I put us in the best position for that to happen. So if it was going to happen, let's be positive. Let's make it happen. Let's go out there and do it. Let's push right up into that last minute. And then we go home and listen, 1-0 against Singapore. That's a great result, boys. You worked until the end. But as it happened, you know, the gods were shining on us that day, and Daniel Bennett couldn't stick his leg out, and in which case, Chris Greatwood scores. Yeah. So, you know, and Chris says himself, there was a big tackle made by Anton. Now, arguably, if Anton hadn't made that big tackle, and I mean, he really cleaned Daniel Bennett out. That was a big, big tackle.
Yes, it was.
If he hadn't made that tackle and been as physical as he was, Daniel Bennett probably would have been in a better position to try and stop that cross from Jimmy, which would then not have allowed us to equalize against Singapore, which probably wouldn't have led us to where we are now. So there's all these little facets that went on. That tackle kind of, you could argue again, much like Jimmy's header in the qualifiers, you know, was another thing that just started this Azkals boulder that is rolling down the hill now as we see it. So all these little things I have great memories of. And without that big tackle, Chris wouldn't have got the tap in. Maybe it would have fell to whoever, I think someone else was standing behind him. But I will forever remember the celebrations. Those celebrations will never go away.
Yep. We'll share a picture of that later, Coach. Now, when we got back to the hotel, Singapore felt that they were cheated of a point, if you recall. They felt upset that the Philippines parked the bus, and they felt that it was like beginner's luck and all that. Did you take that disrespect with you all the way to the second game? Because Coach Callisto was still talking smack in the press conference.
I didn't take it as disrespect. Why would I take that as disrespect? Before the game, yes, you're making assumptions. After the game, when we've just got a 1-1 against you in the 94th minute, absolutely not. Not a chance I'm going to take that as disrespect. That's good planning, and it's an incredible performance by a group of individuals who are motivated not to lose. Why would I take that as disrespect? That's I have to say, with Raddy, I found him very different from Callisto, and I call him Raddy now because I would class him as a friend. We've had many discussions since. We still stay in touch with each other. He put his arm around me, and I won't tell you exactly what the language he used. But it was after the game when I went over to shake his hand. I shook his hand. He put his arm around me and he says, "You make it effing difficult for me now." But to his credit, he said, "You deserved, the way you guys performed. You deserve to get your point. Well done." I know he was upset at the way we played. I don't really care about that. He was just not happy that he couldn't beat us 6-0 as he had in the past. So the way he handled it and the way Callisto handled it, very different. That night we sat in the hotel lobby and we had coffee together. Or he did. He drank about 46 cups of coffee and 300 cigarettes. So we sat there and just talked until the early hours. But he was very respectful of everything. He was a really nice guy, and that's why we've stayed in touch up until now. The exact opposite of Mr. Callisto after he lost.
Exactly. Okay. Now I'm going to take you to the Vietnam game. The night before the game, actually during breakfast of that day when we got up, we found out that Phil young husband, was ill, that he had the stomach flu and all that. Can you take us through your thoughts when Joseph and Wally relayed the news to you that something was wrong with Phil?
Difficult, very difficult. We were going to have to reshape things because, again, with the greatest of respect to the squad of players that we had, there aren't many Phil Young husbands around in Southeast Asia, let alone in the Philippines. Mm-hmm. So to take him out of that squad, you're losing your biggest weapon. So we would really have had to think things and may have parked the bus even harder than we did. I don't really like that term, but I'm playing up to it now as you've mentioned it a few times. We would have had to change strategy, and it would have been difficult. We'd have had to find a new way. Who knows what would have happened? But fair play to Phil, he wasn't going to give up without a fight. And even when Wally was looking at me going, "It's not going to happen," and I'm pulling them to one side and said, "Listen, I don't care what Phil's saying. Is this going to happen? Is he really? Are we?" And I start pulling my hair out when no one's looking, and what the hell am I going to do? Looking to the gods for inspiration. But Phil wouldn't have it. Phil was playing. It didn't matter what Wally said or what Joe said. There was never a point in Phil's mind when he wasn't playing. No matter how much sleep he had or how much food he couldn't keep down or how many times he threw up. There was never a point in Phil's mind he wasn't going to play.
Right.
One of the most incredible performances I've ever seen from a footballer.
Exactly. But Coach, he wasn't the only problem because Chiefy was knocked down during the match against Singapore. In fact, you had to put in Roel Renier for the game against Vietnam. So I recall during breakfast when the news filtered down, we were having breakfast and then you got up, pulled the rest of your coaching staff. It was just me and Giorgio left on the table. You got the entire coaching staff. Okay, we got to discuss what we need to do. Can you take us through that concern and what contingency plans you had in the event that you needed to replace Phil and why you settled on Roel Renier for Chiefy Caligdong?
In relation to Phil, I always believed that he would play. I can't honestly say that I ever got to a point of thinking, all right, well, if this doesn't happen, then maybe we're going to have to move Jimmy forward and what I never got to that point because Phil would never let me believe it. He would never, "No, I'll play, coach. I'm going to play. No, it's fine. I'm going to play. It's no problem." No matter what, like I say, no matter what Wally and Joe said. So there was never really too much discussion down that line. With Chiefy, things were written about me once I'd left that kind of I was a bit of a dictator and everything was mine and I didn't really involve anyone else. But it was crucial that we always sat around a table, all of my staff. It was crucial that guys like Brax, guys like, they all had an input. They all needed to say. Coach Cabalida needed to tell me, what he thought. I needed assistance. I didn't have all the answers in my pocket, and that's when you need assistant coaches around. So it was incredibly important that I still do that now. I still very rarely do I make a decision without bouncing off every staff member, including the goalkeeper coach, because he might see something that none of us see.
Right.
So we talked about these things and just bounced ideas off each other. And I asked them, you know, in their heart of hearts, if we can't play Chiefy, who can play that role? And the suggestion was made that Henair can do it. And from what I'd seen of Henair, you know, he must be about, what, 63 now, Henair? Because he was about 45 at the time. But that boy, an absolute machine. I've never seen anything like it. You know, you just, I'm scared of the Philippine army if that's what their, you know, if that's what their individuals are like. But the guy was fantastic. He was, you know, he gave everything he possibly could. He was cramping up in the corner. I'm screaming at him in the last couple of minutes, get on your feet, stop sitting down, get up. Chase the ball, chase after the guy. I'm screaming at him, stop cramping up, get up, chase. He gave everything he had, absolutely everything he had, in a position that he's really not familiar with. And again, one of the unsung heroes of that group. A lot of people talk about okay, we had Phil Foreigners and these guys flew in and blah, 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 and Neil Etheridge and goal. But, you know, Henair played out of position in probably the biggest game of Azkals history at that time. Yeah. And certainly the biggest success. Right. A lot of people don't give him the credit for that, but that was very much just, you know, we had to make a decision on who was going to fill that role, and Henair was the one that we thought could keep the most discipline, because that's what we needed, and he certainly wasn't going to give anything away physically, so
right.
Made that decision.
Okay, we're going to be sharing another photo here. This was what you drew on the board for the match against Vietnam. Can you see it, Coach?
Yep, I remember it well.
4-4-2, Coach?
4-4-2, and this is more talking about what we have to do defensively. We knew how Vietnam play. They play like futsal. They keep the ball and they pass the ball kind of 10 yards to each other and just try and play around you, you know, try and play into little holes and keep the ball. They don't look to break down wings and put crosses in. They don't play like that. Everything would come through the middle. Mm-hmm. So we worked very, very hard to try and make sure that everybody knew whose responsibility was what, wherever the ball was. Mm-hmm. So if the ball was in a left back position, you know, Ray would be the one going to the ball. He'd be backed up by Rob. Chiefy would be involved. Chris would be involved. You know, Ali would come across. So the person who was responsible for chasing the ball, wherever the ball was, wherever it fell in these segments of the pitch, they knew who was responsible for, you know, to press the ball and to make it difficult for each player. So it was just really reminding guys, you know, this was already stuff they knew. I wasn't teaching them anything new, you know, a couple of hours before the game. It was just going over, these are our responsibilities. These are going to be the things that win us the game. It's not necessarily going to be great attacking runs and dribbling runs and passing out of the back four. It's going to be the defensive side of things, that if we're going to get anything out of it, this is what's going to help us win. We talked a lot about the shape. We mentioned, you know, discipline, because without that we would have struggled. Responsibility, this is what we're talking about with these segments. Being competitive, which is another way of saying being aggressive, making sure that everybody knows that we're on the pitch, and Vietnam will never forget when they played us. Make sure we talk, because there's going to be 40,000 in that stadium. It's going to be very difficult. So concentrate on communication. Yeah. And the last one, I mean, that goes without saying. Every coach writes that on the board. Work hard.
Right.
And if it just shows, if you can tick, you know, all of those 6 key factors, if you can tick all 6 of those, you get points. It doesn't matter who's on the pitch.
Right.
And then looking at the priorities, fullbacks, don't allow anyone to get any crosses in. Stop the ball out wide, even if they go wide. Centre backs, what does that say? No balls unchallenged into feet. So anything where they're trying to play into feet, they're trying to play through the holes. Make sure we're tight up against them. Don't allow anything. Don't allow them to turn. Don't allow them to play. Centre midfielders go with runners, because they had very, very good centre midfielders, as I found out once I actually got to Vietnam. Some very good players in there, and they like to play this little futsal game where it's kind of give and go. So you have to go with the runners. You can't let any free men go. Be positive when we have the ball, and if we can play forward quickly. Try and get it forward into feet quickly, and then be able to support. And if you get an opportunity to shoot, and then make sure we follow it up, because there might be a tap in there. And make sure we have a good pace to our play, defensively and attack. You know, get to the ball quickly, make it difficult for them physically. You know, get there fast. Don't allow a quick, very light-footed team just play around you. Don't do it. You've got to match their pace, and you know, if you're quick defensively, they're going to have to play even quicker, which is going to make it very difficult for them. So, yeah, that was just talking through what we put up on the board, and you it worked very, very well. Doesn't often work as well as it did, but it certainly worked well that day.
Right. For all those watching this webcast, you're watching Usapang Football with Coach Simon McMenemy. I'm Rick Olivares. Coach mentioned a lot in his game plans for Singapore and Vietnam. He mentioned discipline. Now, Coach, I'm going to show this picture. I'm sure you remember this very, very well. Let's see.
The fine list.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before Coach explains this, I want you all to know that Coach collected 100 pesos from me because I brought in my laptop to lunch, and he collected it happened twice, so he collected money off me. So, Coach, how did you come about this fine list, and what was the intention of? Was it to foster camaraderie and all that? Go ahead, Coach.
Listen, it's all the good stuff that people enjoy being part of teams and team setups. There's a bit of humor in there. There's a bit of team building in there. There is a bit of discipline. I don't like taking fines, not serious fines, because what I've found in my time in Southeast Asia is that, 1,000 pesos to a star player might not be a lot of money, but 1,000 pesos to a local player who's made it into the national team for the first time and makes a mistake, that might be half his salary. So money means different things to different people. So really, this was just a token gesture, and it was always very funny. But there were certain things in there that, people were expecting Philippines to be a ragtag kind of underdogs who were just going to get thumped and then go home. But I wasn't prepared for us to look like that. Yeah. So I wouldn't allow slippers or flip-flops to be worn on the bus or in the restaurant by any of our staff. And that included yourself and included some of the cameramen that were with us. I took money off them as well. And it just installed this professional attitude, this, listen, we're here to do a job, but at the same time, had a little bit of fun with it. It built that team spirit. And if you remember at the time, we did a lot of work to try and level out this idea of fill foreigners and locals. And even, this one further down, sitting at a table of 4. So all locals are all fill foreigners. They get fined if 4 of them sat on one table without a local or a fill foreigner there. So just all of these little things, just trying to kind of bring this team together. And when I first arrived, one of the things I noticed that in training, when Ali Borromeo got the ball, local guys wouldn't tackle him. So he was a centre-back that would pick the ball up and dribble right up until the halfway line before anyone got near him. They were just saw, it's Ali Borromeo, I'm not going to tackle him. They were intimidated by him. And as much as that's a good thing that he's an intimidating player, you don't want your own teammates to be intimidated by by Ali. So I said to Ali before, I'm going to make fun of you a lot. I'm going to poke fun of you, and I'm going to get the locals to start laughing at you. And I want you to be okay with it, because it's so important that everyone starts to feel part of the team. You don't want one person being, I'm this important and I know I'm this important, and then someone else is down here and they know they're not as important as this guy. Everyone has a role to play. And that proved true when you talk about someone like about Hiner playing in the game against Vietnam. He didn't know he was going to play, but he stepped up and he was just as important on the day as Phil, as Neil, as any of the big names that were playing in that team. So this was all about, yes, the discipline, but also making us look good, introducing that little bit of professionalism, making sure, there's things on here that I still do now, 10 years later. I will not have any, there was the thing that eating food before every team member is present. I won't have that. I won't have a player go back and take a grape off a fruit salad before everyone else is sat down waiting to eat. He'll get fined, or he'll do a punishment of some description. But every single time we're together, it builds this idea of being a team. I am part of a unit. I am part of a group. I'm not an individual, and I can't act as an individual. So all of these things, arriving to breakfast without your teammate, one comes down and goes, oh yeah, he's on the toilet. Well, why did you come down then? So you come down, you've left him up there. Now he's going to be late. Well, that's not being a team, team player, is it? Surely you're both in it together. So yeah, all of these things. And then we had a little bit of fun, this idea of Anton brought in this idea of flipping your fines. So if you got fined, you could flip for it. If you got heads, then the fine, what does it say there? An incorrect heads or tails call, your fines are doubled. And then all of that money, I think, went into a night out or a social where we could all sit down and, again,
It
some
went
people look down at the idea.
We had coffee.
When
The money that you got from that,
That's right.
we numbed in.
That's right. We all had coffee. Yeah, that would be the one. We all sat around with coffee and cake like really old adults.
Exactly. Okay. Coach talked a lot about fun, just to make the atmosphere light, but there's more to this fine list, and I'm going to show you something unique that Coach came up with. It was a way of poking fun at everyone, but no one sure wanted to wear this. Coach,
Oh yeah, the donkey shirt.
Take us through this, Coach.
Well, I've seen a lot of pro clubs do this, and it's nothing really new in terms of league football, where you're, every day. If you have a career of 20 years, you're on a training pitch every day. It's the same sort of technique. It's the same sort of drills. You're doing the same thing every day. This is just a gentle reminder that, you've got to put the effort in every day. And you could be, there was two parts to this. Firstly, you had to do something that made you stand out as not being very good today. So maybe we're doing a shooting drill and you've not hit the target, or maybe you're late to training again, or maybe you forget your shoes, or maybe you're just having a bad day in training. But it just motivates everyone to be that bit better, in everything they do, in everything. And I mean everything, being to the bus 10 minutes early, having their shoes with them, having everything packed before they leave. So just trying to promote professionalism all the time. And when professionalism breaks down, not meeting it with anger or displeasure or frustration or sending them home, just saying, hey, listen, I need you to be better. And because of that, I'm going to embarrass you. That embarrassment works. Money is different, like I say to everybody, but embarrassment works. No one wants to be embarrassed. Mm-hmm. So, the deal was that at the end of training, there would be a vote, and all of the players, the coaches didn't have anything to do with it. All of the players would vote on who was either the worst or who deserved to wear the donkey shirt at the next training session. And the rule was that had to be worn next to the skin, and you weren't allowed to wash it. So you can imagine how bad it smelled after a while. No one wanted to get it. So yeah, it was something that we brought in that it just created a bit of fun, a bit of healthy competition, a bit of team spirit, all of these little kind of, I don't want to say tactics, but all of these little gimmicks, just to try and build that team, to try and get everybody laughing at each other, to try and get everyone on the same page, but at the same time to promote discipline and professionalism in a fun way.
Right. Okay, from there, we're going to jump to the Vietnam game. They were the defending champions, and 40,000 people packed My Dien National Stadium that night. And Coach, they were stunned. They just really couldn't score. And, Neil did a heroic job at goal that game. What is your takeaway from that game, aside from a superb Chris Greatridge goal and Phil finishing off Vietnam?
I think there was a huge amount of underestimation from the Vietnamese. I think they thought they were going to walk that game. They thought they would just play us off the pitch. I think there was a huge amount of arrogance from their coach, in that I don't think for 1 second he watched the Singapore game. He didn't watch how we played. He didn't try anything different. He didn't have a plan B. He didn't come up with a different solution to the problem that we were setting him. And it was the same problem that we set Singapore, and they couldn't break us down. We set the same, we didn't have the facets of ability to be able to go from a 4-4-2 to an attacking 3-5-2 and play with fast wingers. It was the same problem. But again, much like, Raddy, they weren't able to come up with a solution to the problem we set. And his argument afterwards that that's not football, and I fear for the future of Philippines football, when ironically that was the game that launched Philippines football. Exactly. So, coaches will always be frustrated, and I know full well that when you lose games that you should win, the pressure's coming, the things you have to answer the next day, the scrutiny that you're going to be under the following days. And ultimately it cost him his job. But I think we learned a lot about what we're capable of when our backs are against the wall and we work as a team. And all that work that we put into, all of those things that you've just shown, all of those fun little things about being fine for wearing slippers and wearing a donkey shirt. You know, every single thing that we did in run up to that game came to fruition within that game at some point. You know, the discipline of staying in shape, the discipline of not going chasing another goal, the discipline of fighting right up until the end. Hinair on his knees at the end of the game in cramp because he's giving everything in his legs. Phil Younghusband practically throwing up on the pitch and running straight off the pitch to go to the stalls to throw up again once he'd scored his second goal. There are so many different stories and so many takeaways from that game. I remember it as the purest, most incredible, odd-defying performance I've ever seen. And I count myself as incredibly lucky to have sat there on the side. I say sat, I didn't sit throughout the whole game. Of course I didn't. I'm jumping around like a lunatic, but I was a passenger. I was watching, you know, that was the fruition of everything that we'd done up until that point, being put into a match and displayed at the highest level, at the highest stage it can be in this part of the world at the time it needed to be done. And there are so many lovely little takeaways that, you know, the Singapore game wasn't live on TV. The Vietnam game was the first game live on TV that people had seen in a while. We got the great result against Singapore, so a lot of people were tuning in for the first time to watch the Vietnam game. And if there's one game in history that a football fan is going to watch or want to watch, it would be that Vietnam game. Right. So it all just played perfectly. The game plan worked a treat. We got our bits of luck. Neil was making save after save, half of them with his eyes closed, and they're just cannoning off his massive body. You know, you had so many little stories. Rob with his endless last-ditch tackles. You know, he played more on his backside than he did on his feet in that game just because he's making so many last-ditch tackles. Right. It was a superhuman performance from a group of individuals that I will be very blessed and lucky to ever be involved with a performance like that ever again. And that's the best way I can possibly term it, as a two-time national team head coach. It's just something you don't see very often.
Chris Greatwich played the game of his life and the tournament of his life. In fact, aside from scoring that goal against Singapore, he scored against Vietnam and assisted Phil on that second goal against Vietnam. Can you talk about what Chris brought to that team, that leadership? Because I think Myanmar latched onto that and they tried to box him in our match against Myanmar. Your thoughts, Coach?
Well, it goes back to a decision I had to make, and you know, one player that I got quite close to my second time in the Philippines with Morocco. You know, the player I had to work with, Simon Greatwich. He wasn't involved in 2010 because I got given two players to make a decision between, and I didn't really know the players that well. I knew of Sai. I'd known him before from Burgess Hill. I didn't know Chris, but I knew he'd been a good player, and I knew that he brought a certain level of experience that maybe Simon didn't have. But who was the better player? I really didn't have enough knowledge to know. So I had to make a snap decision sitting in Dan's office before we left. You know, we can bring Simon, we can bring Chris. I was told at the time, rightly or wrongly, Simon was recovering from an injury and that Chris was a little bit more experienced. So just based purely on the fact that I needed a bit more experience in that team, I chose Chris. Now, I've said many a time, and I've said it recently to Chris, that my probably biggest regret from that whole run was how I handled Simon Greatwich. I didn't deal with that well. I didn't have the knowledge at that point. I was incredibly naive. I was just, there was 1,000 things going on, and actually looking after a player and managing a player was probably a million miles from my thought process. And what I know now about dealing with people and man management, I should have dealt with that situation a lot better. You don't need to speak to the guy you choose. You have to speak to the guy you don't. The guy you choose, you're going to see him in 10 days and he's going to play. The guy you don't is not going to see you for a while and probably isn't going to like you very much. That's the guy you have to deal with. So in the run up to that, you know, I had to pick between Greatwich brothers. And considering Simon played a very big role in me getting a job in the first place, to then exclude him from the team, not exclude him, but not choose him when I had a 50-50 decision to make. That was kind of a big deal. But knowing what I know now, to bring Chris's experience into that team that was one of the biggest decisions I made, and it brought a level of knowledge and experience to that midfield that I probably wouldn't have had I gone a different way. Arguably, I may have had a different type of technique, but Chris brought a knowledge and a fight that proved itself in every game. I mean, he's gone on to say that he went into that tournament thinking, well, I'm not going to play because I'm not fit. And I didn't know that at the time. Had I known that, I might have made a different decision. But he openly said he hadn't played in a while, and he wasn't fit, and he wasn't expecting to play much. But as it happens, you know, we put him in straight away, and he just ran his socks off. He gave everything. And, you know, right up until he got sent off in one of the semi-finals for tackling the goalkeeper at about waist height. But he was just, to be honest, you know, just like every single squad member at that time, they were inspirational. And anyone watching the backstory, the camaraderie during dinner, the stories in the hotel, you know, they're all role models that Philippines should be incredibly proud of. And Chris played a priceless part of those, not just scoring the goals, but the leadership that he showed, the driving of people, the getting on people that needed to keep going, you know, shouting at Hiner to keep going all the way till the end. You know, there was great times. They really were. And like I say, inspirational role models, all of them.
After beating Vietnam, the scene in the locker room was surreal. People were going nuts, and on one side you had Phil vomiting his guts out, with Jimmy just, you know, trying to calm him down and all that. And people were just screaming and all. It just outside people were stunned. They couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. And I recall when it was your turn to be ushered into the media room, and I was with you, we came across Callisto, and he was waving his finger against you, and you tried to shake his hand, if you recall, and he refused it, and he was pointing his finger at you. What was running through your mind at that point, Coach? One, you just won the biggest victory in Philippine football history, and everything was just wild. And then all of a sudden, you have this guy who refused to shake your hand, you know? Your thoughts?
I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for him. I felt sorry for the fact that I'm talking in you know, in descriptive terms that I've not used very often: inspirational role models, heroes, you know, game changers, history changers. And after the game, the only thing he wanted to say to me is, "This is not how you play football."
Yes.
Not the fact that these guys had changed history in their own country and produced a performance that, okay, to the detriment of your team, you got through anyway. So, you know, but you just didn't have it within you to credit the 11 players that had just finished the game. You didn't have it in you, like Raddy had, you know, a bit of tongue in cheek, but at the same time, Raddy had the class to turn around and say, listen, incredible performance. No one expected that. We went one more against Vietnam and actually won the game. Yet he didn't have the respect for those players to credit them with any sort of praise. Forget his attitude towards me. We'd had a couple of run-ins during the game anyway, because I felt like the referee was giving them everything, and I let the referee know that he was giving them everything. And Callisto didn't like me shouting at the referee. I didn't really care too much about that at the time. So when I went over to shake his hand, I was very respectful. I held my hand out. I didn't have a big smile on my face. I wasn't jumping about. You know, I've been on the other side of that a few times, and it's very frustrating when coaches come over with a big smile and, hey, we just beat you. How are you? Yeah, great. No one likes that. So I was incredibly respectful walking over to him. It was the first thing I did. I didn't celebrate, didn't jump around on the players, wasn't, you know, rolling around in my suit. I went straight over to him as the first thing, as a sign of respect to the opponents, which I still do now. And he waved me away. And I just felt sorry for him. That's when I started to smile, because you show me the type of person you are, and I'm over the moon that I've just beat you, and I can do it with a massive smile on my face. And when I saw him again, I gave him the opportunity. You know, I was straight faced, went to shake his hand. He wasn't having it. You meet people like that in life. You know, the game. Football is about winning and losing. Now, I've just been sacked from the Indonesian national team. So as much as we're talking about success with this national team, I failed with this national team, with Indonesia. So this is the life of a football coach. These are the ups and downs and the roller coaster that you have to navigate. But how you do it dictates how people see you and what people think about you. And if you're one of these guys who loves to rub it in people's faces and then gets aggressive when you lose, nobody wants to work with you. No one remembers you. No one has any respect for you. And I won't be that guy. So in the face of something incredible, yeah, I mean, I floated over to him. My feet weren't touching the ground. I was on cloud 9, but I was very respectful in the way that I treated him, to shake his hand and, you know, congratulate him on a good performance. There's not a lot else I can say about that. You know, I can't account for how other people react. It's just not a reaction that certainly I would condone or I would expect.
Speaking of respect, when the Azkals returned to the Sheraton Hanoi Hotel, Singapore and Myanmar had this guard of honor at the entrance.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I remember that. Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, Raddy hung out with everyone until the wee hours of the morning, and that was one of the coolest things, right, Coach?
But this is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This idea of honor and respect and understanding what goes in to that performance to make it so special. And the fact that Callisto just passed all that aside and thought of himself individually, you know, oh, you beat me. This is oh, I'm in trouble now. I've got all this. You shouldn't be doing this. Mm-hmm. You know, he put himself in front of his team, which I'll never understand, or at least I'll never respect. But I'll respect Raddy, you know, forever. The fact that, like you say, all the players were standing there as we walked into the hotel and all clapping. Myanmar players as well. We hadn't even played Myanmar yet. They were all there clapping.
They were.
On the understanding of what we just achieved. That's the thing. I know. That's what it does to you. It's the understanding and the recognition of what those boys had just achieved. Mm-hmm. You know, we knew we just beat, you know, we were on cloud 9. But the fact that other teams and opponents that we just fought against, they stand up and recognize it, and they're saying, "Hey, boys, wow, well done." That's a really, really classy gesture. And like I say, yeah, I'll remember that for a long, long time.
Right. Coach, one of the people watching is Dr. Carlo Jose San Juan. He works at a hospital here in Manila. He says, "Congratulations, Coach. Did you ever hear from, picking up from where what you're talking about, did you ever hear from Henry Callisto again, Coach?" That's what Doc Carlo is asking.
No, sorry. I would love to tell you another story, but no, I think he lost his job a few days after the Suzuki Cup finished. He didn't qualify for the final, and in which case cost him his job, especially with the loss against us at home in front of 40,000. I then ended up, when I left the Azkals, I went to Vietnam and I went to his old team, which was interesting because there's pictures of him all over the office that I was working in. He was the head coach that took them to the championship, and in which case that championship got him the national team job. Right. So I followed his footsteps into that club, and I never met him again. And I would be exactly the same to his face. You know, I would never call him out on it. I would still show respect because I believe that football is a very small community and people remember these things, and it says everything about you. So I would love to tell you there's another part to this story and that we caught up later and he battered me in a car park or something. I don't know. But no, it never happened. There was never a part 2.
Right. Okay. We had the draw and a win, but the match against Myanmar was still crucial. Right, Coach?
Mm-hmm.
Before we discuss that game against Myanmar, we had to drive an hour and 40 minutes up north to Nam Dinh, where it was really cold. And speaking of cold, and Coach talked about the fines and where the money went, we want to show you exactly where it went.
There's our coffees.
Back. That's coffee.
Vietnamese coffee. It's amazing. I lived off it my time out there. We were always going to there's coffee shops everywhere in Vietnam, and they're very, very big on their coffee. So that seemed like an apt place to spend a lot of the fine money. Why not? Right.
Now we want to show another picture. Coach, do you remember that morning, in the first morning in Nam Dinh, after breakfast, or was it before breakfast? He said to the team, "Let's do some jogging." And we all went out. Coaches, yourself, I was there. And there were about a dozen guys on motorbikes and bicycles trailing us, asking us if we wanted to fight.
Yeah.
Vietnam had lost the night before. And I remember Coach saying, nobody say a word. Nobody look at them. Just look forward and jog. Coach, what do you remember of that?
Well, again, it all goes back to this. You know, we were being provoked. We were being, yeah, that was it. I remember that picture being taken, of course. We were being provoked by guys on the street, and it was another story. And in this, I mean, that was probably before the social media we have these days. There was probably Facebook back then. That was about it.
Yeah.
But it's still, you know, it was important to me how this team behaved. It was important how people saw this team. Mm-hmm. They had so many expectations that we were just going to be this ragtag group of individuals with no discipline and come here and get beat 10-0 and go home. Yet we'd been into Mydin Stadium with no fans, won. Mm-hmm. And then the next day, you know, a couple of days later, we're out for a gentle jog and we're being provoked, and people see our professionalism and understand our professionalism. And they're hopefully they're blown away by it, that this is a new era of Philippines football, and that, you know, this is how the Azkals are going to be from now on. And certainly if I was in charge, it would have been carried on. But yeah, it was just important to me how people saw the team. I think it reflects very heavily on the coach himself and how he puts himself into the team. And, you know, that was a really great group of players there. There's individuals there. I'm looking at the guy sitting behind Haner. That's Mark Drinkuth, who got flown out because I was told he was amazing. And he's a lovely, lovely guy, but he wasn't ready for that level of football. And he actually picked up the
this is his jersey I'm wearing.
That's his jersey. You've got Mark's. Yeah, so we started to nickname him Jet Lag because he kept falling asleep wherever he was. It could be lunchtime and we'd be sitting there eating. You'd look across at Mark and he's got his head on the table just fast asleep. But he picked up we can still call him Jet Lag now. You remember Jet Lag? Oh yeah, Jet Lag. Only a young kid, but still, he messaged me on Facebook some time ago and said that, you know, being involved with that squad and going through the celebrations and the build-up was one of the highlights of his career. And he didn't play a minute, yet he still sees it as one of the highlights of his career, being involved in that squad. It's great to see that picture and see some of the faces there. Brilliant.
Do you have this picture, Coach? I have a bunch of them.
I do, yeah. I've got all these, all of these pictures I still have. I've got them in a folder that I keep. Okay. But it's great to see them all as we're talking about them.
I'm going to show a video. Let's hope that.
Oh wow.
This was your press conference. Let's see if it opens. This is your press conference when we were in Nam Dinh. Okay. I'm sharing this. These are your first words, Coach.
Amazing. Just amazing. The effort the boys have put in. And that last game was tough. Vietnam, being motivated to go and play Vietnam in front of 70,000 people is actually fairly easy. Motivation is never a problem in situations like that. When you come to an empty stadium against a team that a lot of people now are telling you they think you can beat, to get the motivation right all the way through the game. Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I'm so pleased.
All right, those were Coach Simon's first words during the press conference that preceded the match against Myanmar. And Coach Simon actually mentioned that there were hardly any fans, but when we played at Nam Dinh, we had fans. 12 Englishmen drove all the way from Hanoi to watch and cheer for the Philippines. Coach, what do you remember of that? That was another surreal situation, right, Coach? Who were they? Did you know them, Coach?
Well, as it happened, there's a father and his son who, the son I used to play with when he was a couple of years below me. So when I was kind of 18, 19 playing youth football, he was a couple of years below me and broke into the team. He was a good player. And we're still friends to this day. But he said his dad was one of the coaches on the team. Mm-hmm. And he was at home and he realized that I was head coach of the Philippines national team. And he just said, "Do you know what? When's your next game?" And I told him that we were playing in the Suzuki Cup and the games are going to be here, here, and here. And he said, "Right, okay." And a week later, he phoned me back. He said, "Me and my dad had just booked." Now, this is coming from Sussex, England.
Wow.
They came specifically for that game.
Wow.
And they're always gutted they didn't make the Vietnam game. They came to the Myanmar game because the Vietnam game was the interesting one. The Myanmar game was, it was crucially important that we got the point. But they travelled all the way from Sussex because their friend was head coach of the Philippines national team. So they just booked a package tour and just came out for that. I think they came out for 4 days and came all the way to Vietnam to watch the game and went all the way home again.
But coach, not everyone flew in from England, right? I think there was some.
No, there was a few guys. I think there was a few guys, and I got to meet them afterwards. And I think that they'd seen that there was a head coach of an English team, or I say British, just to keep my dad happy. A British head coach of the Philippines team, and they love football. They probably hadn't seen much local football and picked up on the story, especially after the Vietnam game, and wanted to come and see what we were all about. So travelled to the game to watch it.
Mm-hmm. Coach, again, that was a crucial match that we needed at least a draw to get through the next stage. But Myanmar was really, they paid attention now to the Philippines, right, Coach?
They watched the games, and they were, I think that was probably, in terms of our game plan, we should have won that game. I think we walked off the pitch frustrated that I think Phil hit the post, Neil, Ian hit the post a few times. There were chances in that game where we could have won it by playing higher up the pitch and not playing our tactic. I think they did very well in kind of trying to get us out from our position. They understood how we played and didn't come out purely to attack us. They kept possession across the back and worked to try and draw us out. But I think we controlled that game very well against an opponent who, at that time was still seen as above us. But I think we controlled them very well. It was I think quite a comfortable game for us. And in the end, as I say, the feeling was that quite obscurely, we should have won that game. There's games that we're going into where we don't have a chance here. We're going to try and fight as hard as we can and try and scrap for something, and we get it. And in Vietnam, we were never expecting to get anything, but we get it. Against Myanmar, we're playing the game. We're like, we can win this game. Let's go out and it was a different approach and a different feel, and it was a little bit. It had a different feel to it, but we still went out and approached it professionally. The defense still did a very good job. They didn't really look like scoring, and it was us. If anyone was going to score, it was going to be us. But yeah, that just getting that crucial point that put us through to the semi-finals was a real magical moment. It really was.
Right. So immediately after the game, the team went back to the Voang Hotel in Nam Dinh, where we had to pack up and drive back to Hanoi because the team was departing for Manila the next game. Now, for everyone who's watching, Coach Simon just said that everyone was ecstatic that they were making the next stage of the competition. That was uncharted territory. But at the same time, there was trouble ahead because we were not going to play a home game in Manila or anywhere in the Philippines. Coach, can you talk about, I remember that evening when we got back to the hotel in Hanoi, everyone was just talking about, okay, what are we going to do? Because we didn't have a plan.
Well, it was the realization kicking in that I think if you remember at the time, there was still a hell of a lot of controversy about the presidential situation in the PFF as well. We still had 2 presidents, and that was just a minefield. I really, as a coach, as a national team head coach, you try very hard to keep your president happy, but if you don't know who your president is, that makes it incredibly difficult. So there was a lot of things that went on there that politically could have been seen as a massive distraction. I remember the first game against Singapore, just going back quickly, and some of the boys got hold of the back page of one of the Manila newspapers. Mm-hmm. And you had the president saying that this wasn't the team that he wanted and that he was going to rip the whole team up and build it around another player and that everyone was playing, the coach would go. And we just got a point against Singapore in a national competition. Yeah. And then you've got the president saying that he's going to rip the whole team up and do different things to it. And some of the players are looking at you and trying to look to me for an answer. And I just genuinely I didn't know how to even approach that. I thought the president would be doing backflips that we just got a point. But instead, he's saying he's going to rip the team up and build it around different players and that none of these players would be involved anymore. So there was always that political shadow that kind of followed the team, and we addressed it a few times and just said, listen, boys, we're here for each other and each other only, you know, and we've just got to get our heads down and work and forget about all the distractions, much like Vietnamese guys on motorbikes shouting obscenities at us. You know, just get your heads down and do your job, be professional.
Right.
These are some of the things you've got to put up with. We have no say in the political stance of what's happening with the federation. We have no input. So do your jobs and no one can say anything bad about you. If you start getting involved and making comments and commenting on Facebook or speaking to press, that's when you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble. So just whatever happens. It's not your responsibility. Do your jobs. But it was tricky, especially once, you know, we got to semi-final, and I remember walking out into the lobby of the hotel and I've got one president sitting here and one president sitting there. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, do I go and shake both of their hands? Do I blank both of them? Do I blank one and shake the other one's hand? It genuinely was a minefield. And I remember it very well. I remember the hotel. I've been in there many times since. It's in Jakarta, around the corner. That side of what went on there was difficult. But once we got the results and we started to do well, it was easy to just blank out. It was only when it was physically put in front of you, there's a guy standing there and you don't know how to react to him. Should I shake his hand or not? Should I be around him? Should I not? He's just said all this crap about my players that I'm really not happy about as their head coach, getting very defensive about it. So, yeah, it was the realization once the Myanmar game had finished that, okay, now what happens? Are we going to get to play Manila? Are we going to be able to play a home game? Up until that, my whole time in the Philippines with the Azkals, I never played a home game. Probably one of my biggest regrets. Never got to play in the Philippines, which was a real shame for me. But given how it played out and given the games that we played in Jakarta, would the players in hindsight go back and say, well, we should have played one of those games in Manila? I'd have preferred that. To go through those two games in Jakarta, I mean, that was on another level like I've not seen before. So it's one of those things. We didn't have a say in it. We just had to deal with it and get on with it. And we read the newspapers to keep up to date with what was happening because no one was really talking to us.
Exactly. Now, before the team flew to Jakarta, the homecoming in Manila saw the team come home and feted as rock stars. In fact, the team was invited to make a guest appearance during the halftime of a basketball game at the PBA. And how did you feel, Coach? I mean, that must have been unusual, especially for a British guy. Like, oh, you know, it's supposed to be football, but we're there in the back.
Rick, it was all a dream. I mean, getting the job in the first place was a dream. So it just added to the whole, you know, I didn't see it as, oh my God, look, people know who I am now. There wasn't really any thinking like that. It was the fact that the whole thing to me, I'd been working so hard to concentrate on just the football and not get tied up in the fact that I'm now a head coach and I'm on the other side of the world for my family. And I didn't really have time to think like that. It was more, okay, let's get down to work. Let's get coaching. Let's get involved in the football. Let's see that through. And then that just went from long 10 to qualifying to finals to, you know, and there wasn't really a gap in between where I really was able to just switch off and look around and see the impact that we were having. It just seemed to be another press conference, another thing that we had to go to, another morning thing, another signing, it was just, it was only really when you look back at it and you start piecing it together and you think, oh, there was a real change there. But at the time you don't notice it. You're just that zoned into what's going on that I don't really think I noticed the fact that people kind of knew my name a little bit more.
The final practice of the Azkals was at the University of Makati, where it was packed with people. And at one point,
I remember
there were pitch invasions and the team couldn't practice anymore. So we all met in the middle of the pitch to discuss what we wanted to do. And Ali and Coach were saying, well, the fans took their time to come over. So we should at least say hi, or if they want some pictures, let's go do it. Besides, we're leaving anyway. Coach, the whole thing was already surreal. You left without much fanfare. We had a press conference, if you recall, and that was the first press conference ever for the Azkals. Before in any other time, there was never a press conference for them. So, what were your thoughts at that point in time? Because everyone just wanted to jump in the bandwagon and all that. But it was amazing. It was great, you know?
Yeah, it was. I mean, there was a realization that, listen, the stadium's full watching us train.
Yeah.
No one comes to the games yet. They're now watching us train. That's incredible. So at the end of the day, football is about the fans. It's not necessarily about the players. It's as much as we live and breathe it, it's still an entertainment. It's still something that people pay to go and watch. And if people don't pay to come and watch it, then it's a very different experience. So, you know, I wanted to give something back. I needed to make sure the players understood who they were playing for, and that now, you know, you could tangibly see the success they'd had in the Vietnam game, the efforts they put into that game. Look at the reward. Look at now what's happening. Look at the direct correlation between you putting everything you had into that 90 minutes and getting a result. Now look at who you're playing in front of. Look what you've created. Nothing to do with me, just simply, this is you guys.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to get more, you have to give more. And in which case, getting the fans over, doing signings, having photos, you know, that's all part of a normal national team setup. The fact that it hadn't been in the Philippines before was credit to them, how they'd managed to change things in such a short space of time. And if they were able to go on and do better things, then it would only get better for them, both in their career, their earnings, their life, their, you know, whatever they wanted to do. So it's all part of the game. It's all part of you know, thanking their fans for the support and being a person, being someone that they can tangibly go and speak to and talk to and physically be someone, not like a Premier League player that they see on TV that they'll never meet. These are your heroes. They are your role models. These are people that you need to believe in and watch and support and, you know, push them onto greater heights. So I was very keen for the fans to get on the pitch and allow the players just that 20 minutes, half an hour of, you know, being a known footballer and signing autographs and having pictures and inspiring the 5-year-old that comes up and shakes their hand and gets their jersey signed. And, you know, I was very aware of that, and I wanted that to be a part of our build up to these games, these very difficult games in Indonesia.
Okay, we're going to digress a bit because I need to ask Coach Simon what's up with this picture. Every time he got on the bus, Coach Simon would put on his headphones, and I'm not sure if he was listening to motivational stuff or listening to music. Coach, what were you listening to back then, if you can recall?
I can recall very well. The reason I always put on headphones is because it was very easy to be sitting at the front of the bus as, and I say this trying not to get emotional. It's very easy to sit at the front of a bus with a whole team sat behind you. There's a national team behind you.
Mm-hmm.
And then behind them is the rest of the country. And all of that goes through my mind as I'm sitting there on the way to a game. And the best way I can kind of just calm myself, not get carried away, stay in control, stay confident, not get emotional, not start crying like a baby at the front of the bus in the sheer awe of the situation I find myself in,
mm-hmm.
was to just listen to music. And I'd put music on and I'd think about being at home. I'd think about my friends, and then that started to make me emotional. So I stopped thinking about that. It was purely trying to control my own emotions, putting music on at that point. It wasn't for any other reason other than the fact that I was a new coach. I was still very new to this experience. Mm-hmm. It was an emotional roller coaster, and I was trying very hard to stay in control of my emotions. I wanted everybody on the bus to believe that I'd been through this before. This wasn't a big deal. We're going to go and smash it. I've got the plan. Stick to the plan. We're going to do it. And I think I managed it until I got into my hotel room. And I remember doing some interviews with you where I got very emotional sometimes. I remember sitting in the hotel looking across at the stadium, crying my eyes out at the sheer scale of what we'd achieved up until this point and what we were going to have to go through in the next couple of days. So a very emotional time for me. And this was the best way I could kind of just get it all under control and just get some sort of handle on the responsibility that it took to sit in that seat at the front of the bus.
Yeah. I want to touch on what Coach Simon said. He never wanted to show a lot of that when he was coaching on the sideline. He would show a lot of emotion. In front of the team, he tried to be calm. If you notice that what he wrote on those whiteboards, he always spoke about positivity because he wanted to project that. But once we were alone, like we would talk in his room, we would talk a lot. That's when he would really share a lot of his emotions. And it was an incredible experience, not only for coach, but for everyone, myself included. Now, coach was saying that people knew his name. Everyone knew his name. I'm going to show some pictures right here. When we left, that last practice in UMAC was packed with people. The practices by the Azkals in Jakarta were packed also with Indonesians. And everyone wanted to get a piece of the national team. How weird was that, coach? And this is just one picture. I have lots of them.
Yeah, so I've trained on this pitch many a time now with club teams in Indonesia, and this is right next to the Bung Karno. It's a little sports area where they have a number of pitches, and this one is fenced off.
Right.
But all the whole way around the fence was at least 3 or 4 people deep while we were training, and this is the day before the game. But what I've come to learn about Indonesia is that this is very common. You know, if a team is in town playing against Persija, which is the Jakarta team who play in the Bung Karno, this happens every week. It's a sheer love of football that people want to come down and see these players. They want to see these guys playing. They want to see what Indonesia or Persija or whoever's playing is up against. It didn't hurt that you had guys like Phil Younghusband, Neil Etheridge, James Younghusband, all really good-looking guys. You know, half Filipino, half English, British. Very easy on the eye. They were. How do I say this? How do I say this politely? They appealed very much to the female contingent of football fans. So yeah, I think because we were plucky, because we kind of rose up from nothing, because of the way we fought and didn't want to get beat, I think a lot of people kind of recognized that, appreciated that, respected that, and wanted to see us in real life. They wanted to come out and see who are these so-called superheroes that have managed to do the impossible. I think they wanted to see us in real life. And my God, how young do I look there? Totally naive. God, the things that have happened since then. There's definitely a few more grey hairs since those days.
Well, at the start of the tournament, no one wanted to talk to Coach Simon. Hardly anyone asked questions except for me.
Yeah.
But at this point, everyone wanted to talk to Coach Simon. How were you? I mean, you said you were not exposed to this. How did you handle yourself, Coach? Because people were in your face all the time, in the hotel, in the training grounds, even post press conference, people were still asking you questions.
I think I've never really had any media training. I've never really been told how to speak to press. It's one of those things where you learn very, very quickly, and you learn from your mistakes. You learn when you think maybe you've given too much away or you might have said too much, but a lot of it was just based on common sense. You know, I watch a lot of football. I always have. I've always watched a lot of football since I've been little. And it sounds a bit of a cliche, but you go back to thinking about what players say when they're interviewed and what coaches say and how they don't give too much away. And, you know, my upbringing, as I've mentioned a few times, is to always be respectful, no matter what anyone says to you, to always show respect and honor the game. And, you know, that badge on my chest there you see just next to the microphone, the fact that football wasn't a big deal in the Philippines, and the fact that we'd had to fight to even get those uniforms, it didn't matter. I had a whole country behind me, and I was very aware of the responsibility that I had, being the face of the country, you know, in terms of the press and how they approach my players. And I tried to shield them as much as possible. If anyone was going to do press conferences, it was going to be me. I didn't want anyone really talking too much to Indonesian press. So I was happy to take on board all of the press duties, just to make sure that, you know, the players were given a bit of calm and weren't always thrust and asked questions all the time, and it wasn't a big deal made of. But I just applied respect and a bit of common sense and really just answered the questions in an honest way the best I could. And I have ever, you know, until I sit here now, unless you ask me something stupid, that's not going to change.
I'm not going to be doing that, but we do show this picture. Game 1 of the semifinals, the team took a bus, which was really a short ride because the hotel was just close to the stadium, if you recall, Coach. But it was the longest ride. It took like 30 minutes for us to get into the stadium. I'm going to show you a picture. You can see Rob over. Everyone was standing up because like people were swarming the bus and
They were
beating
rocking the bus.
Yeah, they were
They were
rocking.
rocking the bus back and forwards. So that the hotel we stayed in is called the Sultan, and that's kind of a football hotel. All of the teams that play in Jakarta stay in the Sultan because it's right next to the training facilities. You
Right.
can walk to the stadium. Now, if you leave the Sultan lobby and walk across the car park through another car park, you can be at the Bung Karno in around about 12 minutes.
Right.
We've done it many a time. I've taken the national team on a walk around the Bung Karno in the mornings. Very, very walkable journey. But because we had to do it on a bus, we had the guy standing next to Rob here. That's a police officer, an armed police officer, with a police officer in front of him. And there's other police officers further down the bus. There were guys walking in front of the bus, pushing supporters out the way so that the bus could get through. When we got into the stadium, as we approached the gates, and again, I've been through it many a time now, and my mind always goes back to that situation where it's just a sea of red. And they were all very respectful, but at the same time, they were rocking the whole bus back and forwards. And we were kind of sitting there on the bus just like this, watching this bus go back and forwards, everyone looking at each other. My God, what are we here for? What is going on? But at the same time, the adrenaline's kicking in. And I mean, this is what football at this level is all about. And especially in Indonesia, this is Indonesian football as I've experienced in the years since. Something that the players weren't accustomed to, something that they've not experienced before. But this is what it takes to come and beat countries like this. You have to beat their fans before you can actually beat the team.
Right. Coach Simon mentioned that we had policemen inside the bus. For the second game, we had Marines inside the bus because it was pretty bad. By the time the bus got for game one, by the time we got into the stadium, some of the ultras managed to slip inside. And as I recall, Jerry Barbaso opened the door at the back of the bus and they swarmed the team. But alert security at the Bung Karno managed to push them away because they wanted a piece of the guys.
Yeah.
So for game two, we had Marines on the bus. Can you believe that? Malaysia, when they played Indonesia in the finals, they went to the stadium in an armored personal carrier. So go figure, right?
Yeah, that's sadly in this country, Rick, that is standard operating procedure when you play these teams. I've been inside those armored personnel carriers a couple of times going into stadiums now. It's just how it is. They're fed up of losing buses because they just smash the windows. They throw stones. I've had bottles thrown at me, fireworks fired at me. You name it. I've had, pretty much everything. There are certain teams when they play each other, they're not even allowed to play in the stadium. They have to play at a neutral venue because the police are just fed up of the violence and everything it causes. The whole country or the whole city goes on shutdown because two teams are playing. Cars get wrecked, things get overturned, things get set on fire. So they don't take any chances. And the reason the Security acted so quickly is because they've seen it a million times. Jerry, in his naivety, just thought, oh, hello, I'm going to step out and say hello to people. And they won't allow that. And they do. I mean, I've never seen so many guns at football as I have in Indonesia, in any part of the world. It's in order for games to go ahead here, they need a police certificate. The police have to sign off on the game that they can supply enough crowd or enough enough police officers based on the game that's being played. So these two teams, if it's a nothing game, not so many police. But if it's Persija versus Persib, two of the big teams, there's a whole army patrolling around the stadium with helicopters overhead, and they still find ways to hurt each other, the supporters. So it's a different world, and it's a different type of support that Filipino players just weren't used to. And again, like I say, if you're going to play these teams, if you're going to get involved in it, this is what you have to overcome and deal with.
Now, before that game, we paid a visit to the Philippine Embassy where we were treated to a nice lunch. This time, we had fans in the stands, not just Englishmen, but Filipinos. The scary thing was they were intimidated by the home fans. Coach, your recollections of this lunch, what was going on?
Yeah, it was nice. It was really the first time since we'd been in Indonesia that we were able to kind of relax a little bit, knowing that we were around other Filipinos, and they were great. They put on a big spread for us, and we had a lunch there and got to talk to everyone and meet everyone and felt a bit of support. And I think that a lot of the guys who were at that lunch ended up coming to the game. I think
Yeah.
our allotted home game in Indonesia, I think we had 65 supporters. And I
Right.
think a lot of them would have been the guys that came to that lunch, or some of their family members and things like that. But yeah, we did a lot of this. Wherever we went, we would always have a lunch with the embassy, whatever country we were in.
Right.
It was a nice touch, and again, it just reminded the players what they were fighting for.
That's true. Let's talk about now the two matches against Indonesia. Did you feel at that point, Coach, that by then they took us really seriously, and we had a tough time in those two matches. We gave as good as we got, but we found it a lot tougher because they were playing us more physical. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Coach, we were like a finesse team while they were knocking us all over the pitch. If you recall, Coach, your thoughts, Coach?
I think that their head coach Alfred he's a really nice guy, and again another coach that I've kept a relationship with. I know for a fact that he was very disappointed that we didn't have our home game played in the Philippines, because he'd watched all of the games previously, and he was very aware of the fact, and he actually paid us the biggest compliment of saying that we were the most disciplined team he's ever seen in Southeast Asia. Now, coming from someone of that experience, I mean, I took that as a big compliment, both of the players and myself. So he was very aware of the challenge that we brought, and he was very worried about trying to break us down, because at the end of the day, he was playing in front of 90,000 home fans. There was massive expectation that they were going to put goals past us. He was very concerned that they weren't able to do it. So he hyped the players up, and when you play in front of 90,000 home fans that are all singing, I don't think it's too difficult to be motivated to go out and perform and be physical and put yourself about. So, the fact that we were even bigger underdogs that day, Vietnam was one thing, but then to go to Indonesia in front of 90,000 Indonesians, there's a cultural aspect to Indonesian football where Indonesians are very, very comfortable at home. The whole idea of being at home, for whatever reason, gives them that extra 20, 30% in their performance. And so much so that the teams that win the league tend to be the teams that do good away from home, because they take extra points. Everybody wins at home. So there's this kind of culture of playing at home in Indonesia that players feel comfortable with. They feel at home. They feel relaxed. They're not great travelers, as I've proved with them. They struggle when they play away. So there's a cultural aspect to that. And I think that he wanted us to play in Manila so that we would the pressure would be on us to come out and play, to step out from our defensive formation and try and win the game. And then that would allow him space to attack in behind, because he just thought that we were a very, very difficult team to beat. And I think he had concerns that they wouldn't be able to beat us. And I think that we were very unlucky. I think that, like you say, we gave as good as we got. We had some good chances. We could have scored a few times. And I think the goals we conceded were very fortunate goals. I mean, Gonzalez, I've got a good relationship with Gonzalez, and I've had my arm around his head and put him in a headlock since for scoring those goals. I give him stick every time I see him. I'm not talking to you today. Go away. I'm not talking to you. I'm still in the mood with you. He's a nice guy.
Right.
But the noise in that stadium it's just something that even now there is a common bond between that squad, where whenever I went back to the Philippines, when I went back with Meralco, every time I came across a player, Hiner, Boogie, Yanti Basales, any of those guys, all the guys that were involved, James, Jason De Jong, there's this kind of common bond. There's this kind of, tip of the hat. There's a big hug, and there's something different. There's something special. And I think going through an experience like that, and the noise, the feeling, the experience of being in that stadium I've been in it since, and I've been on the right side of it. But to go in it, against it, it defies belief. I can't adequately describe the noise that was in that stadium that we had to play up against.
10 years later, how do you look at this entire experience? If there's one thing you're going to tell your son Hunter about that time, what would that be? Is it the respect that the team, you, and everyone else got? Because after that, everyone took the team seriously.
Yeah.
And it opened doors for you, Coach.
I don't think it would be. I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't think it would be something about me. It would be more about the players. It would be more about what they achieved. These are a lot of these guys had been through whoopings. I mean, big results against other teams. They've been on the end of hidings. But for whatever reason, and myself and Chris have discussed this quite a few times, that for whatever reason during that tournament there was this perfect storm. There was this perfect coming together. For once, all of the jigsaw pieces just fell into place, and it just worked. It just clicked. And there was a general feeling that once we got the Singapore result, we're not going to get beat. We're just not having it. We're not having it. We're going to fight and fight and fight and fight and fight with everything we got. And that was true through the semi-finals. You know, other teams have been into that Bunkano and been thrashed. Good teams, higher teams up the rankings.
Right.
We didn't have any fans and played 2 games there and lost 2-0 on aggregate. There are teams that get beat 6-0 comfortably.
Yeah.
It was an incredible moment. And I think it goes to prove that when a group of individuals get together and there is a collective goal that they all agree on, and every single person in that group puts 110% into achieving that goal, incredible things can happen. Mm-hmm. And I don't think anything more than that. You know, I can show Hunter the tapes. And, oh, look, there's Daddy in a suit. Doesn't he look good? I can show him all those things. But ultimately, what comes out of that, for me, is the proof that if a group of players get together and put their mind around achieving a goal, no matter who the opposition is, no matter how many fans they have, no matter how far you have to travel, you can achieve it if you're all going to work together. Mm-hmm. And I hope that that's something that Hunter takes away from looking back at videos of his dad when he was better looking.
Right. Coach, we just have a couple of questions left. I know we've taken a lot of time. But there's
no problem. There's
some readings here. June Chris Vincent says, "Good evening, Coach. Good to hear from you. My colleague Joseph Ramos, who's a sports writer, he says, this guy," he's referring to you, Coach, "was a major part of Philippine football's major success a decade ago. He's one of the reasons why the Philippine Azkals rose to worldwide stardom." So that's from Joseph Ramos.
It's very kind. It doesn't. There's not a day goes by where I don't respect that massively. You know, I've said to Chris and on another podcast a few times when I've been asked, how was it done? How did you? I mean, there wasn't a thought process. There was a job there to be done. I had a feeling of responsibility. I got my head down and worked, and I'm blessed to be a part of it. But you know, I keep saying it, and not for the want of wanting to look good on your show, but it was those guys. It was the same guys that had been beat before that just turned around and said, "We're not having this anymore. We're not doing it anymore. We want football in our country. We're fed up of getting beat." They're the ones that put the effort in and really changed history. All I did was organize them and motivate them, really. And they didn't take a lot of motivation, not playing at that level. So I'm blessed to have been a part of it. But I was very much a bit part in terms of the actual work that was done. Those players should be seen as national heroes in my eyes, in terms of what they gave to football.
Well, just being generous, but definitely was a major part of that. Coach, how have you changed as a coach all these years? Because I'm going to put on some of your pictures here coaching your team right now. What are you doing differently now? What have you learned through these years in Vietnam, the Philippines, Vietnam, in Indonesia, all your travels? How have you changed as a coach, if there's anything that you've,
I think that what I've learned more than anything is that the higher up you go, the more it's about people. It's not about tactics. It's not about pulling out some amazing 5-3-2 formation. What 2010 proved was that when you have good relationships, when people understand you, when they believe in you, when they want to fight for you, and when they want to fight for each other, as I just said, great things can be achieved, no matter who the opposition is. So yes, you get more experience. You learn how to handle, slightly more cameras than there were in the Philippines. Indonesia is a very different prospect from being a head coach of the Philippines back in the day. But I believe I'm still the same individual. I still believe I hold the same things true. I'm still very respectful no matter what people think or say of me. I believe I always lead two lives. I have the life that is me, that the person that you will meet face to face, and I'll still be the same individual that I was back in 2010. But then there's the other side of me that people look at me from this in a stadium, or they look at me on social media, or they look at the results and make judgments about me, and they think I'm that type of person. And that's just something you have to deal with when you work in a country like this. And it doesn't sit right with me. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it's part of the job. You can't complain. I think I'm more experienced in terms of just how good football can be. I've had my arse handed to me a couple of times, especially as recently as head coach of the national team. But there was never any realization that I'm the best coach in the world. There was never any thought process along those lines. But what I think I am good at, and have proved that I'm good at, is building teams, is building a group of individuals, is getting a group of individuals to work towards a target. And I can do that in any country. Probably I think the thing I'm most proud of is that I would like to think that nearly every single player I've ever worked with would work with me again, would want to be on one of my teams. No matter whether the results worked, whether I got sacked from the job, whether the press go wild at me on social media, the players that actually get to know me, that know me as a person, most of them, nearly all of them, I could count on one hand the players that would want to work with me again. So that's the highest form of compliment I can take from those guys who actually fully know me and have dealt with me on a personal one-to-one basis. The guys that sit up in the crowd and make judgments, they're not credible. So I don't really, they say I'm good, they say I'm bad, I don't really care. It's when you get feedback from the players, that's the thing that matters to me. So I don't think there's a clear answer to your question. I think I'm still the same individual. I still crack jokes when I can. I still try very hard to create relationships. And if anything, I put a lot more value on those relationships maybe than I did back in 2010, because I know now the effect that can have when those relationships are strong and that team spirit is unbreakable.
Well, the proof is in the pudding, because coach has won. That was a historic run that paved the way for the success of the Azkals today. He won a championship with Meralco. He's won a championship also in Indonesia. So I guess the proof's right there. Just a couple of more things, Coach.
No problem.
How do you look at it today that a Briton found his success in a beautiful game in a faraway land that he probably never even thought of when he was still playing in England? What do you tell your friends back home, Coach? Because you've been here 10 years in Asia, Southeast Asia.
It's difficult to explain to my friends back home. I obviously I talk to them a lot. We have a WhatsApp group, and we when it goes back to my friends back home, we're still laughing about toilet jokes and still making fun of each other and calling each other every name under the sun, just as we did when we were 11 years old. I'm lucky enough that some of my best friends, the first day I was in school, they were sitting next to me. So one of the best men at my wedding has been my best friend since I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I'm lucky that I have that group. It's difficult in a sense that in this part of the world, I'm very different from the individual I am at home. The guy at home, it's just Macca, or it's Simon, or it's Sai that we went to school with, who tries to crack jokes that aren't very funny, and I try to be a good friend as best I can, as everyone does. But on this side of the world, I'm a very different individual, and I have to be, because of the job that I have and what that job entails and what it means and the responsibilities what that job carries. Now, whether I think about that too much, whether I carry that with me too much, that's for other people to make a judgment. But when you go to Papua, which is a 6-hour flight from Jakarta to play an away game, and you arrive in a country that just looks alien to you, arrive in a city that looks alien to you, it's so far away from anywhere. And I'm sitting at the front of the bus, and we stop at traffic lights, and there's all there's loads of cars on the other side and bikes, and there's a little kid on the back of his dad's bike, and the little kid looks round from his dad, looks up at the bus, sees me at the front, and I can see him go, "That's Simon McMenemy." That is the sort of stuff that carries a responsibility. That kid knows me. I've never been to that part of Indonesia before. He doesn't even speak the language I speak, but he knows who I am. And that carries a weight with me. That carries a sense of responsibility. And you know, I'm a Brit on this side of the planet where there isn't many, and I'm flying the flag arguably higher than a few. So there's a weight that comes with that. And I don't think there is a more responsible or responsibility laden job than being a national team head coach. That's why I wore a suit. That's why I would still wear a suit. I wore a suit for all of the national team games with Indonesia, because that's the respect that I feel. I feel that level of responsibility, in that, you know, I need to give this job the most respect I possibly can. So I carry that weight around with me a lot in this part of the world. Whereas at home, it's like the shackles come off and I can just be a normal, stupid individual. Whereas I can't here. So there's my Jekyll and Hyde life that I kind of am settling into after 10 years.
Right. How important is your support group, your family, Miss Sarah, and your son Hunter? She shared his photo. I asked her it.
I know. I simply can't do what I do without these two. I just can't. There's no way it would work. I wouldn't be a sane individual. I couldn't deal with the pressure. I couldn't understand the responsibility. I couldn't live up to the standards that I hold true, the standards that I try to pass on to my son. I would fold, I would fail, I would give up, and I would go home. And you know, these guys, they just give me that energy. They give me that motivation. You know, being a football coach and winning and losing and being judged on what 11 guys do. People will say that you're terrible. They'll say you're a bad coach because 11 guys just lost a game of football. Well, you weren't playing. You were standing watching the same as every other supporter. But no one watches me work. They just make judgments. So it's frustrating at times. But to have this support network when I come home, to be able to just, you know, 247 million people in this country, and all of them feel the need to tell you whether you're good or not. So when everyone has a voice, it's quite nice to be able to come home and just close the door and not speak to anyone and just jump in the pool with this lunatic and play football around the house and smash things and annoy my wife. And, you know, just that's what it's all about. That brings it home. That I talk about this Jekyll and Hyde, where I'm this person that people recognize, whereas at home I don't have to be that person. I just go back to being the silly idiot who loves kicking a ball around the house with my 3-year-old son. So I can't adequately explain how important that backup, that support network is. If I hadn't been married to such a strong woman who understands my lifestyle, the things that I hold dear, and the responsibilities that I feel, I wouldn't be able to do the job I do. I wouldn't be able to be the person I am, and I certainly wouldn't be on this side of the planet for much longer. They both give me the strength to keep going.
I wish your family certainly all the very best. We have 2 more questions, Coach. Can you
Sure,
talk
no
about
problem.
your job as a pundit for Fox? How cool is that, Coach? That's got to be amazing, you know?
Yeah, I don't mean to downplay it. It's cool to be seen as someone who knows something about football in the Philippines and football in Indonesia. I think it's more because they don't have anyone that can speak English from these countries. But I think as a coach, you always want to pass on an idea. You want to, you know, my background, much like Chris Greatwich is based in development. It's not necessarily based in elite coaching. It's not necessarily about the winning and the losing. My background in football has always been inclusion. It's been trying to pass. It's been trying to use football for better, to educate, to make things, to give people a chance to play sport. That's the background I come from when I was back in England back in the day. So, you know, those things still appeal to me and are still some of the reasons I do what I do. So to be able to go onto Fox and, you know, explain the great stuff about Filipino football. And a lot of the stuff you see in Indonesia is it's negative, it's fighting, it's demonstrations, it's fans killing each other. But to pass on some of the good stuff, to give an understanding of how passionate people are for football in this part of the world, and really to get things right for the people of the Philippines. You know, if they're going to stop watching, if these people on television don't get things right, and just cast Philippines aside like that press conference all the way back in 2010, you know, there's a certain level of respect that's now due. The Philippines have been ahead of a lot of these countries. It frustrated me back in 2016 when Philippines hosted the Suzuki Cup, that in the studio, it was all Singapore guys. Well, the Philippines are hosting. They're one of the favorites. Why is there no one talking about the Azkals? Why is it all Singapore, 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 Malaysia? Even the guests were all Singaporean. So I just got frustrated at this. I was actually working with Fox pitch side, and I got about 2 or 3 minutes to say something. And I just kept complaining. I said, listen, this isn't right. This really isn't right. It's so biased towards Singapore. Why can we not do something? Why can we not expand? Why can we not get things right about the Philippines and about Indonesia and about Vietnam? And why can we not inform them correctly? So eventually, you know, they listened, and I'm fortunate enough to be utilized by Fox to talk about Philippines football and Indonesian football, and to try and get it a little bit more accurate and a little bit right, and show it the respect it now has earned and deserves.
Right. Before we get to the last question, we have a coach. Coach Dindo says to Coach Simon, good evening, Coach.
Good evening.
Kudos to you because you started the rise of the Azkals. Thank you. That's what Coach Dindo says.
I appreciate that. It wasn't just down to me, but I appreciate the sentiment. It means a lot to me. It really does.
The very last question we're going to be asking in our webcast tonight. How do you feel that Liverpool is 2 games away from winning its first in 30 years? Because there were a couple of Liverpool fans in that team. You had Coach, you had Rob, you had Chiefy, you had Dan, Neil, and myself.
Well, my team Celtic have already been given the title, quite rightly. So it would have been just so cruel for Liverpool not to have won the title this year. I'm glad that they've made the decision to start up again. I know that I spoke to Neil a few weeks ago, and he was a little bit unsure of whether football was going to start again. But I'm really glad football started again. I think that a Liverpool team that went so close and had such an incredible season and was still beaten by Man City previously, to then go out and do it all over again. I mean, the motivation that took to do that, and the man management is one thing, you know, to work as hard as you've ever worked and have that much success and to do as well and still not win, to then go, right, boys, we're going to have to go even more, and then to go out and do it. And then when they've done it, they almost have it taken away from them again. I think if everything's right in the world, then they go on and win the title and everyone's happy, and no matter what Man United fans say.
Right. There you have it. It's been an enjoyable evening talking to a man who I enjoyed serving under. I still think very, very highly of him. And I'm so happy for him. He's found his place in the world, and I can only wish him more success. Coach, any final words to your former players, reflecting on the 10th anniversary of that historic Suzuki Cup run? Any last words, Coach?
Just to echo what I said before, you know, I'm very fortunate and very blessed to have picked up a group of players who are prepared to get their head down and work as hard as they did, and I give all the plaudits and all of the positives to them for changing the whole landscape of a country's football scene. What they did for the country and how they changed it. It should quite rightly be called Azkal Day. It should quite rightly be celebrated 10 years later. And these players should be applauded for everything they've done and the odds they faced. No one expected us to do that. No one expected them to perform like they did. And to this day, I'm still known as the Philippines coach, even though it was 10 years later and there's been, 3-4 coaches since me now. If I'm in Vietnam or Malaysia or Myanmar, where I was recently, you're the Philippines coach, right? Yeah, 10 years ago, yeah, that would be me. So it just goes to show what we were able to achieve. And I hope, you know, I know that domestic Philippine football is having some difficulties right now, and I keep very abreast of what's happening now. I will always have an interest. I will always find it difficult to listen to the Filipino national anthem, much like I do the Indonesian national anthem, those two national anthems, just, forget love songs, forget anything emotional. Those two songs ripped me in half. I was saying recently in an interview that they played the Indonesian national anthem at my son's first assembly. He's 3 years old, and he stood up and they start playing Indonesia Raya, and I'm trying hard not to show that I'm wiping tears from my eyes. And this is the level of responsibility and blessings that I feel to have stood in front of both of these countries and feel the weight of the country stand behind them. It's really not something I take for granted. It's something I carry with me every single day, and it will continue to motivate me to try and get back to that level, and that feeling of just that perfect storm that we talked about. To get back to that point will motivate me every day, and I will carry it with me for the rest of my life.
He talks with a lot of passion. He coaches with a lot of passion, and he lives with a lot of passion. That's the great Simon McMenemy, who we've been fortunate to have as a guest in Usapang Football. Coach, I want to thank you so much. Thanks so much to Miss Sarah for helping set this up. And regards to your son, I wish you guys all the best. And thank you for philosophizing these sports, Usapang Football. This is Rick Olivares. Thank you to everyone watching, all those, the coaches, those who commented for Coach, and the team. Thank you so much. Coach, thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Rick. Thank you very much. Take care.
You're welcome. Good night, Miss Sarah. I hope you can hear me. Good night. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.